Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel discussion on measuring return on investment for government IT investments, co-sponsored by Howard University and RAI Systems. I'm Dr. Harry Keeling, a professor from Howard University Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and alongside me is Mr. Jeff Myers, Senior Director at RAI Systems. We will be your moderators for today's discussion. This morning, we delve into the subject of return on investment for public sector IT investments with the goal of ensuring the best value for taxpayers and strategic alignment with agency mission objectives. So why are we here? Well, many agencies driven by their finance managers or program executives incorporate return on investment estimates into their project reviews and prioritization process. Whether it's comparing trade-offs between IT spending and other agency priorities, or ranking competing IT projects for funding, understanding ROI is crucial. Yet, accurately measuring and predicting ROI remains a challenge. Our expert panel will address these issues, discussing effective methods for measuring and estimating ROI and its critical role in federal IT decision-making. Our distinguished panelists, each an expert in their field, will share their insights and experiences on governance, implementations, and ROI assessments that are pivotal to the success of IT investments. So thank you all for joining us for this significant event. This session promises valuable insights into making informed choices in IT investments. My colleague, Jeff Myers, will give his opening remarks now and introduce today's panelists.
Thanks very much, Dr. Keeling. And as always, it's a pleasure working with you and with your colleagues at Howard University. I want to emphasize this is a part of a series, a government IT breakfast forum series. And the purpose of the series is bluntly to try and help promote awareness of some of the capabilities of Howard University's students towards the federal government, and similarly to promote the opportunities for public service careers to Howard University, but also, frankly, to bring real experience from successful leaders in government that kind of help address cross-cutting challenges across the federal government with respect to IT. Just briefly, a moment about REI. We're not a very well-known firm, but we do make impact. We've helped improve security with the citizenship and benefits processes and immigration services. We've helped the Health Resources and Services Administration improve health across the country. We've helped DSA improve the efficiency of its property management and disposition. And we've helped attract innovations to NASA, bringing things such as the navigation system for the Mars rover, Small Business Innovation Research programs. I'm particularly proud that tonight REI and our customers have nominated 5 different members of our team of customers for the Fed 100 Award for Achievement in Federal IT, and all 5 of those nominations were successful in receiving Fed 100 Awards tonight. I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists, and then I'll step back and turn it over to our first panelist. And that first panelist is Ms. Florence Casule, the Director of Procurement. She has had experience through a federal career with acquisition in IT at the Departments of the Interior, Health and Human Services, the National Labor Relations Board, and now the U.S. Digital Service. Ms. Casule will talk a little bit about how ROI can and should affect the scope of IT acquisitions, such that you choose a scope for your IT projects that will maximize the return on investment for your agency. Next will be April Keston. She's the Deputy Associate CIO for Acquisition IT Services with the Federal Acquisition Service, with GSA, General Services Administration. As with Ms. Casule, she's a career public servant and has moved from between parts of General Services Administration, from Fleet Services to the Federal Acquisition Service, and held roles that relate to operations, analytics, and of course now IT and IT acquisition. Ms. Keston will address IT project selection and approval. Following Ms. Keston, we have Rajiv Alpal, who is the Chief Information Officer for the Internal Revenue Service. It's been a busy tax season, I'm sure, but the work is just getting started, of course, with processing some of the returns. Mr. Alpal will discuss selection of projects, approval of projects, and how ROI influences that. as well as dealing with some of the outcomes and consequences of return on investment and estimating return on investment for projects that have been completed. The next panelist is Ed Wilkes, who is an acquisition expert. And by the way, he has a new book under development, a book guide to the federal acquisition regulations. He's standing in on behalf of the NIH's NITAC, on behalf of Deputy Director Ricky Clark, who was called away at the last moment. He'll talk about return on investments, influences over acquisitions. Finally, on behalf of REI Systems, I'll present a model that can be used for return on investment calculations and can be used for that both in advance of a potential project as well as in retrospective. And I'll have some specific examples about that. We'll try and fit all of those presentations in inside of about 45 to 50 minutes and leave about a half hour for your questions and answers. Dr. Keelan will moderate those questions and answers, but please feel free to enter your questions and questions into the chat as we go along. That way, Dr. Keelan can have a chance to look at them and see if there are two or three of the same question, he can consolidate. With that, let me invite Florence Casule to come and share with you her expertise from the U.S. Digital Service. Florence?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences and insights with this panel. In terms of scope of projects as they relate to IT investments, I just want to go back for a minute and share with the folks here a little bit of my background as a contracting officer. So I have been in the federal government for 15 years. Over that time, I've served as a contracting officer, and contracting officers are the folks who are the ones who get the money from programs and obligate them onto contracts. And through this mechanism, we're the ones who will watch as the money goes onto contracts and make sure that the money is well spent, that the investment is well spent on those contracts, and that whatever the outcome is, we want to make sure that it's actually met. I do want to go back for just a moment and confirm whether or not those who are watching this panel can come into the chat. If you can, I have a quick primer for everyone, if you can respond. So the top agencies in terms of spend, in terms of investments, across, in terms of obligations, if anybody can guess what the top 3 agencies were for fiscal year 24, if you can write that into the chat. What your guess is, the top 3 agencies. Okay, somebody says DOD, Health, and DHS. Someone says DOD. These are some good guesses, but you're actually missing the top 1. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to see if anybody hits the top 1. Okay, so the top agency in terms of obligations for fiscal year 24, also fiscal year 23, was Social Security Administration. A lot of people do not consider that, but Social Security Administration obligated about 16.6% or $633 billion, followed by HHS because of Medicare, followed by DOD that hit at 15.4%. Thanks so much for playing along there. I wanted to provide this information in order to start the conversation around scope. So what determines the scope of IT investments? All IT investments have to clearly demonstrate that the investment is needed to help meet an agency's strategic goals and mission. And to drill down on that, we at USDS, we want to make sure that the scope, that we are meeting the mark in terms of what exactly is the mission for that particular project. And traditionally, it used to be program experts would come together and determine what is the scope, what exactly is the need, and discuss it among themselves. We've tried to push and encourage agencies to seek the information through research, with the actual end users. Who are the people who are going to be at the end of the line, who need those particular investments, and figure out what exactly is the need through true research, meeting with the people, and then figuring out what the scope is there. That ends up meaning that and what we advocate for is for smaller, more modular contracts, in order for the agency to be able to truly kind of time box and control what the scope is, and make measurable investments and outcomes over a smaller period of time. And the traditional contracts that people usually have are 5 years, a base of 1 year, and 4 years of options. There are times when that works, there are times when it doesn't. And so when it comes to measuring whether or not the return on investment is real, um, it's a very different calculation in terms of, when I talk to my kids or my family, we talk to our kids about investments, and you put in money and you think that you're going to get more money out of it. We, within the government, generally the return on investment relates to the organization's mission, and is determined by the measure of the amount of impact that investment has on the mission. And so scoping it, we try to, within USDS, we try to encourage the different agencies that we work with to think and scope it in a modular way in terms of an IT investment, to figure out how do you try to capture the benefits in an iterative way, and not try to boil the ocean all at once. In the past, when I was doing contracts 10 years ago, I've been in government for 15 years. It used to be that we would scope a contract as large as you can possibly, like, put everything into it as possible, and issue a solicitation, come out with an award. And these were sizable awards. I grew up in DoD acquisition, so DoD being the third in terms of obligation amount. These were large contracts. And so what we've started to do, the trend has been to try to scope these to be a bit smaller, in order to meet mission in an iterative way, so that they're bite sizes for organizations and for teams in general to go over. And those have proven to be more successful over time. Let's see. In terms of, as an example, with SSA being having the largest obligation, as an example, over 180 million visitors go to the ssa.gov website. Everyone, for the most part in the US, has a social security number from birth. You hold it till death. It's essential for accessing and managing all sorts of benefits. And people found it very difficult to navigate the SSA website and the myriad of benefits that they can actually attain. In December 2022, a new version of the website went out, and so there was an investment in improving the experience of people who go to the website. Since that happened, over 1 million more account sign-ins have occurred per week. And that's a signal for us in terms of the investment that was made through the contracts and through working with our partners at SSA, in order to ensure that those who need Social Security benefits, from the recipients themselves to their beneficiaries, can actually meet those, get the benefits that they need and deserve. I'm going to stop there in the interest of time, because I don't want to eat up anybody else's time coming behind me.
So appreciate your insight there. Our next panelist will be April Keston.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me here today. I think you're going to hear some common themes from each of the panelists because as Florence was talking, I was thinking about how I can relate a lot to that. Um, I am with the General Services Administration in the CIO organization. My office serves as an IT implementation partner to GSA's Federal Acquisition Service. So let me explain a little bit how GSA is unique and how we've approached greenlighting projects by using not just ROI, but other factors. So a little bit of background on FAS in particular. Mission, like Florence said, is our focus. And the mission of FAS is to provide the products and services to the rest of the government agencies so that they can spend their time focusing on their own agency core mission. And we do that through leveraging the buying power of the government to get the best value for not just the customer, but ultimately the taxpayer. FAS is very unique in that it does not have its funding approved through Congress. It operates very much like a business by charging fees for their services to the customer agencies. They even operate under a P&L statement, and they also have legislation that has allowed them to have retained earnings that are generally used for the capital investments. FAS is also unique in that it's a conglomerate of more than 20 distinct business lines. And those business lines cover just about every commercially available product and service category that you can think of. They've got a proposition value where you'll see the buyer and the seller on that slide, and FAS serves as the broker between the customer agencies and the suppliers, which again allows those customers to focus on their mission versus having to go out and write their own contracts. The other proposition value, is that FAS has a full range of customer support models, from self-service, where FAS has created contract vehicles that agencies can come and put a contract against very quickly on their own, or the other end of the spectrum, FAS can be partners with the customer agencies to actually determine the requirements, write the contract, award the contract, manage the contract, and even the funds for the agency. Next slide. FAS has been heavily investing in modernization and transforming their business systems. So what are some of the other criteria that we look at in partnership? My organization works with FAS through what they have, the executive business case process. And so what are we looking for as we're trying to identify which projects should be moving forward and approved? So we have to balance the ROI with, again, our mission of being best value. It's not just about profits. So we look at the strategic alignment and we ask ourselves, what are the business drivers that this initiative is trying to, that is driving the project for this particular investment? And what's the scope of the project that where we will be able to see whether it moves the needle on some of those strategic goals and objectives. Like, we're very customer focused. We want to make sure that the users of our systems have a great user experience. So is there something that is within this project that will help us achieve that goal? And then there's other drivers as well, where compliance is a significant driver for FAS because of new legislation, policies that come out related to acquisitions, responding to audits and findings from an audit. So we have to make sure that we update our systems to address that. And then we also have where technology is obsolete and can't actually support the business model or the business processes anymore. We have several systems that are on the mainframe and do batch processing. So you have to wait an entire day before you can see updates because it has to go through a nightly cycle. And that's not really helpful for business as it operates today, where things happen in real time and you really need to have that real time data. And then there's also security vulnerabilities. As an IT person, I'm very concerned about that. And there's technologies that are no longer supported. And so we have to make an investment to migrate off of those. We also look at the scope and compare it to other initiatives. Is there overlap between other projects or initiatives that are already happening? Does it duplicate other projects? Does it conflict with other projects? Or maybe it's something that complements another initiative. We also look at the definition of success, if you will. We want to make sure that in the business case, they're clearly communicating what the end state is. And so that way we know, have we achieved success? In addition, where the business case also goes into not just the strategic part of it, but also the project execution of how this investment is going to be managed. So we look at the project risk management plan to make sure that they are considering the risks like resources, which could be financial or people, subject matter expertise, for example. Are there risks around an acquisition or policy that needs to be developed before this initiative can actually be implemented? What are the schedule, scope, and dollar risks related to the project, and how are those going to be mitigated? And then lastly, the technology is also, again, something that we are often having to address as a risk and mitigate through the project. And then lastly, the implementation plan. And we're looking for, like Florence was saying, having smaller scoped projects. So even though we might have a large project that's going to be a multi-year, which is what most of ours are, have they broken that project down into logical functionality that can be delivered? Do they have a roadmap or high-level milestones that can demonstrate when and what kind of business value the initiative is going to deliver? So next slide. So that kind of leads me into how we monitor and execute the projects. You go to the next slide. We've adopted Agile. I'll go ahead and start speaking to it with our business partners in FAS. So by default, that breaks the initiatives down into distinct areas and aligns it to business value. That's where, I don't know if Agile is actually a course in college, but when you are developing using Agile methodologies, you have a vision for what the end state looks like, but you don't necessarily have to have all of the requirements nailed down. You have to have enough that would help you define what success looks like. And then you plan for that work in what we call product increments, which is generally 3-month increments. And then within those 3 months, we execute using sprints or small, like 2-week or 3-week cadences that teams can work on, where at the end of that sprint, you are delivering working software. Now, I mentioned that because within FAS, we've used that because it creates a natural toll gate for projects. And we have a robust governance process. So we've managed to include those toll gates through the governance where the teams actually can come to the governance body and demonstrate what they've been able to complete and how that's delivered business value to FAS as well as the end users, and also speak to what their path is for the next iteration, if you will. The other thing about Agile is it also allows you to identify when a project may not be going as well as expected. And you can see that much sooner in the execution of the project, which allows leadership to make some decisions, whether that's maybe pausing the project to do a dive and see what the issues are, or work on a corrective action plan to get it back on track, and sometimes even canceling the project. In FAS, they've also started adopting what I call an agile funding model, where they don't give the funds to the project all at once. They budget for it, but then they only release it based on when the project has been able to demonstrate that they're executing against their plan, or if they're not, why they haven't been able to reach their milestones and what kind of corrective action that they're going to put into place. Going back to ROI for a minute, one of the benefits of using it is that it's a standard metric. So I don't remember if it was Jeff that mentioned being able to look at projects. It might have been Dr. Keeling, and comparing projects so that you can help come up with prioritization. So even within Agile, there's standard metrics that you can use to better understand how the projects are performing. Burn down charts is a good example. You can look at that to compare how teams are performing and look for some of the red flags. For example, if they're consistently showing a burn chart where they're delivering sooner than planned, then maybe that team isn't committing to enough work and they should be identifying more work to do in their sprints. And then conversely, if they aren't meeting their plan, then maybe they're overcommitting and they either need more resources or they need to start looking at the project in smaller chunks. So just to wrap it up, I would say that we've been able to do some smart IT investments by using these processes and these metrics. FAS in particular, I think one of the really amazing things is that they've been able to double their revenue over the last few years, but keep their staffing flat. And what does that mean? It means that through these IT investments, they've been able to find the efficiencies to be able to generate more business without putting more tax on their workforce. So I'd like to share one example. Part of FAS, one business, is the GSA Fleet Organization, and they operate one of the largest non-tactical vehicle fleets in the world. And right now they have a major transformation project where they are consolidating 19 systems into a single cohesive user experience. Well, that's several years in the making, but throughout the initiative, they are delivering new function to the users as they start consolidating all of those systems. So they're still delivering value as they're executing this huge initiative. And then from at a lower level, one of the things that they've done is every vehicle in fleet comes with a credit card. So you can imagine the potential for fraud and waste that comes with that. And they have an entire team that does nothing but review transactions to find the fraudulent charges. We recently developed a dashboard for them where it flags any of the questionable or unusual transactions. And because of that dashboard that we've implemented, relatively small investment, but a huge return in that the dashboard now flags those charges, which means they've been able to increase their detection of true fraud versus a driver buying a Twinkie on the credit card, not realizing that they just used the government credit card instead of their own credit card, for example. And then they've also been able to save over 3,200 man hours a year, and that's in perpetuity, that they have been spending reviewing all those transactions manually. So now you have about 1.5 FTE that can start focusing on more high value work as a result of that. So just wanted to give that real world example, and I will hand it back to Dr. Keeling.
Thank you so much, Ms. Keston. I'll be sure to mention to my computer science graduates how what they've learned in agile methodology can facilitate the estimation of ROI. So thank you for your comments. Next, we'll have Mr. Rajan Upal. Rajan? Roger?
Thank you, Dr. Keeling. So I'll start by giving a little bit of my background. So before I got to the federal service, I used to be in the private sector, did a couple of startups, one in the internet era. It really was a low code, no code environment to build sophisticated applications. And the next startup was about having analytics software for retail stores like grocery stores like Safeway or Giant or many others. So I did that for a number of years, and I got a chance to join the federal service. I came in and joined the U.S. Digital Service, just like Florence is part of, and was there for a couple of years with the Department of Homeland Security, doing a number of very interesting projects. And I got a chance to be, after that, be part of Centers for Medicare as their CIO. I was there for about 5 years, till about 3 months ago, a little less than 3 months ago, that I got a chance to be the CIO at IRS. And, when both April and Florence are talking about impact, when it comes to ROI, it often, in the case of federal agencies, whether in my case, whether it's CMS or at IRS, where I am now, the impact is what mostly drives our investment in projects. And to give you an example, IRS invested in direct file, and thousands and thousands of people, even though direct file was available for a shorter period of time, thousands and thousands of people were able to file taxes for free. And IRS invested in our call centers and other software like Where's My Refund, and that has resulted in over 1 million hours of saved time for people who would call in. The wait times were reduced to somewhere around 3 minutes. So it almost feels like the ROI sometimes can be so enormous, and the impact is so enormous. What we have to be careful about, to both April and Florence's point, is that not to be careful about how we invest and the kinds of contracts we set up, not to set up huge, large contracts, but break them up into modular pieces and see how they're going and pivot as and when needed. And that's kind of been my approach to things. And the other thing that really is important to me, and in fact, for the rest of IRS, as well as CMS, where I was before, is the fact that we are building applications with human-centered design in mind. We do the appropriate research with the citizens, the users of various applications we might be thinking of, and we build applications that are intuitive and make the life of our citizens easier. That sort of is the driving force behind a lot of the things we do. In the case of IRS, as you probably know, the Congress has asked us and has given us funding to transform and modernize. They've asked us to make sure that for people who want to interact with the IRS in a digital way are able to do so. And we are, based on that, what the Congress has asked, we are down the road executing on a number of projects to make sure that, for people who can and would like to interact with the IRS in a digital manner, can do that. It'd be interesting for you guys to know that about more than 2/3 of the country actually, or taxes are filed electronically, or 1/3 or less are paper returns. But even 1/3 or less of paper returns is a lot of paper returns that we have to take in. And our goal here is, how do we digitalize all that? How do we make sure we we don't just maintain lots of paper, but we convert it into digital assets and then process taxes that way. So there, for us, I think more than anything, it's about impact that of the work that we do that helps us decide where and how to invest. It's about what is the experience our citizens are going to have that helps us decide where and how we should be spending the money that Congress has given us. Um, and that's, and again, back to the same point, it's about how we execute on it, as opposed to giving out large contracts, which has been sometimes that is the right approach, but often more than not, how do we take these large ventures or large initiatives that we have and break it down into small individual pieces so that we have greater chances of success. We have the ability to monitor how they're doing. And to April's point, using Agile as a way to be iterating on the things that we are putting out, and not necessarily trying to put out the most perfect product, but rather iterating over it so we learn from the things that we put out. I hope that that helps. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Keeling.
So much, Mr. Apple. I'll be sure to also mention to my students about how Agile allows you to iterate. That also can impact determining ROI. Thank you for your comments. So next we'll have, I believe it's Ed Realquest, a little rough on the name, but Ed, are you available?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Keeling. Yes, it's Ed Wilgus. Thank you. Close enough. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me on today. I am substituting or pinch hitting for our Deputy Director, Ricky Clark. Just as real quick, my background, I was a federal employee for 30 years. I am the former Deputy Director of NITAC. I'm now working as a contractor as an acquisition officer supporting the NITAC program. As background, NITAC, NITAAC, is the National Institutes of Health Information Technology Acquisition and Assessment Center. We are housed within National Institutes of Health, HHS, Health and Human Services, but we get our authority from the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. So we kind of have two bosses, if you will, OMB, who we get our authority from, and we provide annual reports that I'm going to talk about. And we report through the chain of command at the NIH. NITAC has been authorized by OMB to issue, administer, and govern, if you will, government-wide acquisition contracts known as GWACs for use by all federal agencies within the federal government. That includes civilian and DoD agencies. There's two main purposes of the GWACs. We're a unique office within NIH. There are two main purposes, and these are my words. One is to streamline the IT acquisition process for all federal agencies. And two is to better leverage the federal IT dollar, which ties into our ROI discussion today. And when I say better leverage the federal IT dollar, if there are about $75 to $90 billion in unclassified federal IT spend these days, if we can send all that IT money, unclassified IT money, through 1, 2, or 3 vehicles, then we'll probably get better pricing, more bang for our buck, as they say. There are 3 agencies, NITAC, along with GSA and NASA, have IT GWACs, government-wide acquisition contracts. And if I can give an analogy, it would be like me going out and buying 100 cars. If I can buy through 1, 2, or 3 dealerships, I can probably get better pricing than if I buy through 100 different dealerships. That's the same theory or same idea between by the GWAC management, by the 3 agencies that have the IT GWACs. So GWACs are a key part of the OMB strategy to better leverage the federal IT dollar. Category management has become a rigorous measurement tool or criteria for the consolidated acquisitions. Within HHS or within NITAC, we have 3 GWACs, 2 for services and 1 for commodities, all IT. All 3 GWACs are mandatory at the HHS agencies, and they are all 3 what are called best-in-class vehicles. And that's part of the, known as BIC, that's part of the IT management, category management and measurement. And they're different tier levels, tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, until tier 3. Tier 3 is the highest level, and all of our GWACs are at that level. We have a category management team in our office in Rockville, Maryland. And we have a team of ladies and gentlemen who 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, measure category management for us. And I mentioned every federal agency can use our vehicles. There are many, many federal agencies. I'd like to say all of the federal agencies use our vehicles, but there's always a new one popping up. So I'm going to say the majority of federal agencies use our vehicles. There have been well over 250 that have. So it gets a lot of spend. There's roughly about $4 to $5 billion in IT spend per year that go through the NITAC GWAC. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money even by government standards. So we measure that. Our team measures that all the time. In terms of ROI, it's been determined that, on the government side, there's budgets, and the cost avoidance, the cost savings would equal our ROI, or return on investment. There's roughly a 27% savings from published price lists. So we're very, very pleased about this. Again, our goal is to better leverage the federal IT dollar, put all our money through 1, 2, or 3 vehicles where, the government will get more bang for its buck and better pricing. So how do we measure that? Our team measures that all the time. There's different ways to measure risk in the government. One is through contract type, fixed price, or cost type. Fixed price contracts generally provide less risk to the government. Contractors are responsible for the pricing, but cost type contracts work as well. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that, but I want you to be aware of that. So government controls risk through fixed price contracting, and we measure that all the time through annual reviews and reporting. Dr. Keeling, back to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ed. Next, we're going to have Mr. Jeff Myers.
Thanks very much, Dr. Keeling. I am going to review a model that REI has developed for return on investment. And what I think will be interesting to you is if you all kind of stop and think for yourself, what is it exactly that you might expect in terms of a return on investment? I suspect that a lot of you might say, well, in the stock markets, I get 10 or 20% return if I'm really good. I'm going to say something that's very shocking, but I think that after I've kind of gone through this presentation, you might say, hey, you know what? Actually, I understand how that could happen. What I think that you should be expecting for return on investment in many federal IT investments is not 10 or 20%, but in fact, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 20 times a return on the amount you invest in IT, which is 2,000 to 3,000%. And that sounds shocking. It doesn't sound very credible, but I'm saying that to kind of get your attention. What I want to do is talk a little bit about background first as to kind of why we developed this model. At the end of the presentation, after today, I'll share the slides with anyone who's interested in them. We will also be willing, certainly, to help agencies that may request assistance in kind of trying to explore return on investment, either they may achieve in the future or that they have achieved in the past. The background, though, is that a lot of different agencies, some REI customers and some not, have told us we have trouble getting funding for our IT programs. our chief financial officer, our budget director, the appropriations committee tells us, what's the ROI? And in fact, just yesterday, I was reviewing the results of the most recent customer satisfaction survey from REI, where we asked our customers, what is your top challenge? And for those customers who thought they would have a difficult time overcoming their challenge, the most frequently cited challenge was funding. And so in part, this ROI model is intended to try and help agencies get better opportunities to get funding for valuable IT projects, but also to manage those projects in such a way that they maximize the return on investment as they go along. It's also, I think, useful to see that in other agencies, when they put money into a system that works pretty well, some of them kind of continue putting more money into an existing system and shy away from a new system because they're not really focused on what's the prospective business return. They don't think, for example, hey, artificial intelligence could not just help me double ESA's revenue, but maybe treble or quadruple it. And so they tend to be a little bit risk averse because kind of the future ROI tends to necessitate something along the lines of kind of predicting the future. What will future performance be with the hypothetical IT system in place, which is a challenge. But again, we can kind of share with you some techniques for doing it. Finally, a lot of folks will say, you know, when we make an investment in IT, we're doing it because that will help us reduce our IT ordering costs. We move to the cloud because that will help us reduce the costs of hosting and operations. And so we think that's a part of it. But the bottom line up front is that the return from the business, both productivity, but actually the mission outcomes and their improvements is really what you're going to be looking for when you're considering what the ROI that might justify your IT is. So with that, let's kind of talk a little bit about some of the specifics. We have, in fact, had experience with IT modernization, application modernization, in a number of instances with REI. I'm going to share with you a couple of examples. I'm not going to disclose the names of the clients in this example, but I want to talk to you a little bit about a model that can be both used for kind of estimating what the future proposed projects might produce, as well as assessing the past lessons learned, see what value was produced. And in doing that, see if I can get my screen to advance. I'm sorry. One of the things that's useful to keep in mind is this will help kind of not only with your development of IT and your acquisition of IT, but your management of IT and significantly also your management of your business operations. We do believe that, again, in terms of thinking about the value, it's important not just to think about efficiency, and we do this more quickly or with fewer staff, more work with the same staff, but also the quality and the mission performance that your agency is trying to improve. The volume of work is likely to increase over time with many federal agencies, and actually that's one of the biggest fears that I've run across, which is if we invest in IT, maybe that means we'll have less work to do. Maybe we'll have layoffs. In my experience, that has never happened. Most federal agencies, as the economy grows, as the customer base grows, find that their workload increases and that they may have to do less work for each customer unless they improve their IT. Finally, to determine a future return on investment, again, someone's got to be willing to step up and make some projections. Let me tell you a little bit about kind of the overview of the model, which is every IT investment, of course, is going to require an investment. And as Mr. Wilgus described, you can do that with a best-in-class contract vehicle that helps reduce the amount of the investment, but investment's still going to be necessitated. As well, many people say we're trying to get our IT O&M savings and lower costs. But what I found is that most folks neglect to identify, and almost all of them neglect to measure the program or the business, both improvement as well as dollar savings. So that's the three parts of this model, and it's a relatively simple model. I'm going to share each of those parts with you in one slide coming up. What I want to do to start with is to talk about your required investment. And of course, right now we're assuming that you say want to develop an IT system that will be a custom developed system. The example I'm going to use is one that provides a particular benefit to an HHS operating division's customer, and that helps determine whether or not that customer is eligible for that benefit. They have a large number of customers that they need to determine whether or not they're eligible. They can develop that application in a kind of a custom developed basis, or they can do it low code or no code. or they could buy off the shelf. So the first piece to do is to consider, well, what would be the cost to custom develop? And then we kind of incrementally say, well, if you do low code or no code, maybe it's a little less expensive, but there are some impacts to that. So it may be less customizable, it may be less flexible, but it may be faster to implement. As well, there will be presumably a cost to update software for new laws and regulations or requirements. And that's something that will perhaps be easier if you've got a custom developed solution. It's also something that will allow you to say, hey, we've developed a new solution on a modular basis, as Mr. Paul suggested, but that we'll just discard one piece of it rather than discarding the whole thing when you see a change in law. Additionally, if you're using good software development techniques, you're able to go through DevSecOps and release software production versions that change a little bit each time more quickly, maybe once every 2 weeks instead of once a year. And that tends to give you more innovation over a period of time. As well, with user-centric design, if you have an agency with a system that is 10 years old, the new user-centric design is likely to mean more user adoption and perhaps more user self-service. And so you can see, for example, that user self-service might improve some of your productivity and reduce some of your costs. If you have, for example, a low-code solution that's on a commercial platform, for example, Salesforce Appian, presumably you're going to have software license costs. Now, the other piece, just for the technical parts of the model, is that we assume that you're replacing a system and you're going to get at least 10 years of useful life out of the future system. So in order to kind of make for apples to apples comparison, when we put the dollar figures down, we've said this is a system that will cost $2 to $5 million upfront to build. And therefore, if it's good for 10 years, let's just divide by 10. So a $200,000 to $450,000 cost annually for that custom development. But if you go low code or no code, it's going to cost you less upfront because it'll be faster to develop. And again, with this example, our estimate of that is a $50,000 to $100,000 low cost with low code. So we put kind of figures in for each of these costs and benefits. In some cases, they're based, in all cases, these are based on several actual projects where REI has experience, but they're also based on some things like our estimates of labor costs and effort. And I'll talk about those as we go along. So the bottom line is I'm trying to kind of prepare you to say at the end of the day, here's the overall dollar value and kind of get you to understand what the comparison is between the investment magnitude, the operations and maintenance magnitude, and the magnitude of the business improvements, the outcomes or the commission outcomes or the return on the investment. So that was the required investment. Let's now talk about, in a similar way, O&M savings. The expectation is that when you have a new system, replacing one that's, let's say, 10 years old, you're going to have a stronger system that has lower risk from cyber attack. You're also going to have one, presumably, that maybe is going to the cloud. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be operating in a much different way, although it could certainly, but they'll presumably have less need for hardware and software at peak usage, lower costs for storage. You'll also have easier IT operations because the software patches may be taken care of by the cloud vendor. The cloud hosting maybe does operations tasks like monitoring and load management. You also presumably might get improved resilience because you don't have to have extra software or extra infrastructure to host your backup systems, and you don't have to have the continuous data backups. Again, with a cloud service provider, many of those are already incorporated in the cloud services. You'll presumably need less help desk support because there's a more intuitive user design. This is an example where some of our cost estimates are. You're going to see, for example, a quarter to a half FTE approximately of cost with respect to the help desk. That kind of assumes you're operating it yourself, or perhaps you're contracting with a vendor to do it. Similarly, you're going to see lower user training costs because there's a more user-centric, self-intuitive design. And it's something where with a single sign-on, users won't have to kind of keep track of so many different things. You'll also see less downtime. Now, what you see in each of these cases, for example, is the lower cyber risk. We priced with some estimates, which is you're going to see fewer hacks. You're going to have less effort to recover from those hacks, less downtime and lost capabilities during the course of a cyber or a kind of a downtime risk. With cloud hosting, our experience bluntly has been, although you may have more efficient hosting and better services, typically you're not going to see a huge dollar savings. And again, the reason for that is because often you don't just get the hosting, but you get some services with it, software platform, monitoring, load monitoring, patches, and so forth. So in our experience, that's been a net wash. Of course, your experience in specific instances may vary. And so what you see at the top in the kind of the green box here is you'll see somewhere in the neighborhood of 12.5 to 25% of your costs of the current O&M with your old system be saved when you manage and implement a new system in this instance. Let's talk, though, about the big picture, because the big picture has the essentially mission improvements that are, in fact, going to dwarf those other sorts of costs and savings, both for your investment as well as for your IT owner. What you should expect and you should look for and estimate is improved mission performance, such as better quality, or in GSA's case, as April suggested, more revenue. But you also may see more productivity. So as April suggested, there are some tasks that no longer take as much time. She described saving an FTE or two. You'll also see perhaps better citizen and user engagement because, again, of that more user-friendly software. You may see some savings because presumably your current application, your new application will involve and take advantage of artificial intelligence, robotic process and automation. And it may be as you're developing your system, you're able to do so more collaboratively with partners and achieve lower error rates. So there's less rework. Now, what I want to describe to you is that in this case, again, with an HHS agency that is processing applications for benefits, the business processes that they were able to perform with the new software that we implemented approximately 2.5 years ago allowed them essentially to process more than twice as many applications using the same fixed number of staff. Now, what we conclude based on that is since their staffing cost was 20 million, we said, you know what? We've doubled the productivity of those staff. The staff are still there. It's still the same number of staff because they didn't get any budget increase, but they were able to serve twice as many benefit applicants using the same level of staff. And so in order to put a price tag on it, where necessary, and it's not always necessary, but it helps give you a kind of a sense of the comparisons. That was a savings of about $20 million on, again, the kind of, and that's an annual savings on an investment that, as you saw on the first slide, was somewhere between $200,000 and $450,000. Now, again, that's kind of where we get the calculation. You can see in the bottom right here that $200,000 to $450,000 investment produces this 10 to 20 million return, and then just a little bit of the IT O&M. And so the bottom line is, although it's not often the case that you may want to put it in dollar terms, but that there is often a substantial improvement in productivity or a substantial improvement in quality or a substantial improvement in your ability to achieve your mission outcomes. In GSA's case, it was an increase in revenue. In the case of the IRS, as Rajiv Uppal suggested, it was less burden on taxpayers who can file electronically and do so for free. So the kinds of returns you're looking for, again, depend upon your specific agency. But what we found, once again, is that a number of these things kind of all play into those big improvements in mission performance and productivity. So we've suggested, for example, you know, it's very difficult to segregate out, well, how much of the improvement here resulted from AI. The end result was that we saved quite a bit in terms of dollars, but more frankly, the agency in this case, the HHS operating division, chose never to try and collect those dollars. Instead, it chose to say, hey, we've got many more customers than we used to be able to serve. Now we put the IT in place that allows us to serve them. And part of that was the AI and the robotic process engineering automation. Part of it was the better user-friendly engagement. And a little bit of it, frankly, was the lower error rate because we've got more accurate data entry, less rework, and so forth. Now, one of the things I want to emphasize to you again is that how you communicate this perspective depends on whether or not you can say, this system that we're acquiring, or this system that we're developing, or we're modernizing, or we're revising and reforming, we have goals for it. And those goals are things about how we can improve our quality or how we can improve, you know, our sales of services with GSA, or how we can improve the number and the quality and the services that we provide to these people who are applying for benefit applications. I want to emphasize for you, though, that a lot of this is not just kind of at the end of the game in terms of how did we do with this system implementation. A lot of the benefit of seeing this model is, hey, are we doing things as we move along? Are we trying to implement better user experience so that we will get more citizens serving themselves, more employees who don't make mistakes accidentally because of a difficult to use software. And so they'll allow you, as you think about both your business processes and the IT systems and their design in order to be able to implement them, can we do this in a way that captures each of these different types of returns, whether it be those operations and maintenance returns, or whether it be this lower error rate, or whether it be this better user and citizen engagement. The last thing I want to do is kind of wrap up is to talk to you a little bit about the types of things that you can take this forward to in terms of looking for IT projects, because I think that's one of the places that's most interesting to think about. It should not be a big surprise if your agency has a problem and is thinking about a new IT project, you have some expectations from it. I suggest you actually reverse that. Think about where is the problem. So for example, if your agency has a particular process where it's slow, or it has a great deal of customer dissatisfaction, or you're falling short of peers and other agencies or the private sector, those are the places where performance is low. There may be a big opportunity for improvement, and there may be a lot of value available from an IT change. If your customers aren't happy, there's a lot of rework, and your customers do very little to help themselves. Again, user-centric design and good automation and collaboration with a variety of those users on an agile basis will produce more value than other systems. If you're thinking, for example, about a place where your quality is variable, or there's a potential duplication of work, or at least an overlap of your responsibilities with those of another agency, again, I'm thinking about this case is not about USCIS, but with USCIS, REI helps them coordinate their immigration vetting with the Department of Justice, with the FBI, as well as with other components of Homeland Security and with the Department of State. And those electronic interactions between collaborating agencies made it possible for both USCIS to help their immigration benefit determinations be much more secure, but also faster, more efficient, and somewhat lower cost. So that's kind of the picture that, again, we think that it's possible to achieve dramatic improvements in mission performance and productivity from some types, but not all types of IT. And that, as in this case, if your initial investment on an annual basis, for a system that costs between $2 and $5 million in the last 10 years, that would mean it's kind of $200,000 to $500,000 annual investment. You ought to be looking to see whether or not you can find places to invest like that will produce for you, a $10 to $20 million return. That's what we've seen in our experience with the applications that REI has helped modernize. We think that's what you can look for as well. Let me stop now and turn it back to Dr. Keeling and see whether or not there are questions that the audience has that you would like to ask and that our panelists can answer.
So yes, they are, Jeff. So thank you for your comments. They're very insightful. And I like the way you substantiated your initial claim. So first, let me direct a question, if I could, from the audience at Ms. April Keston. And it's a two-part question. First of all, how much IT investment do you think produced the doubling in revenue that you spoke about? And as a follow-up, separately, what became of the FTE savings? To summarize, did people lose their jobs?
Okay, so let me start with nobody lost their jobs. I think what we have seen in FAS is that they have just been able to operate a lot more efficiently with the FTE that they have and allow those employees to focus on higher value work. In terms of dollar investments, we have probably spent close to 500 million over the past 5 to 10 years investing in modernizing and transforming the business systems. And one of the things I would like to make sure I mention is that None of our IT projects are really driven by IT. They're really all about the business and bringing value to the business through IT enabling that. So everything is done in partnership with them and bringing that value.
Thank you for those comments. Appreciate your answer. So I have a question. So many times in the past when I've been asked for ROI, the requester is really looking for dollar value savings. And I try to answer with improvements, minimal risk, more accuracy, and so forth. And then I'm asked again to be more quantitative. So I'm interested if our panel, one of our panelists or multiple panelists could comment on how do you get around this desire to equate ROI in terms of dollars and to focus more on issues of productivity and service improvement to our clients. And if you can't, how do you quantify risk avoidance and those sorts of nebulous terms and put them into more quantifiable terms in terms of dollars and cents? I think Jeff gave us some insight on that, but I wonder if anybody else has anything else to shed a light on how we might equate things in terms of dollars and cents, which is really kind of where ROI is being asked to address.
And Dr. Keelan, this is Rajiv. I'm not sure if I have an answer as to how to quantify, but what I was going to say is that to Jeff's point earlier, that the return on investment in government is often many, many multiples. And really the focus on our side has always been, on the government side, at least in my view, has been on impact. And where the return on investment can go south is if we do not use the appropriate mechanisms to monitor, like as April mentioned, using Agile and being iterative in the way we do projects, where if we don't do that, sometimes things can drag on for long periods of time, and you begin to wonder, are we getting the return on investment? But I'm not sure if we would be able to quantify necessarily, at least I'm not aware of what a good way to quantify what the return on investment is. It seems like in the case of a lot of the government projects that the impact is so tremendous that we don't even go down the road of quantifying return on investment. It's just very clear that the impact it's going to have on the citizens is so enormous.
Harry, if I might add, one of the things that this HHS customer described to us, they actually never calculated the dollar amount. What they thought about and noticed that both drove their motivation and they were thrilled with was they were able to serve twice as many customers as they had been previously with no increase in staff. And they knew they weren't getting a staff increase, and they were really stressed out about their backlog. That was important to them. But they were even more thrilled and a little surprised, frankly, to find that the customer wait time was cut in half. That essentially customers who had previously had to wait 4 weeks for a benefit decision were now only waiting 2 weeks. And that was their objective in pursuing this new IT application. When we came back to them and said, oh, by the way, this is roughly the return, and if you need to kind of extend this or pursue other sorts of systems that you're interested in, here's a story to take to your chief financial officer. They were very surprised. They were not looking for it in terms of dollars. They were looking for it in their mission of how many victims could they serve, how long was their backlog, how long did it take to serve each victim.
That's a great answer. So if I could summarize it, when you can quantify in terms of decrease in service time and increase in number of customers served, that's the quantification that can suffice to answer the question of ROI. Let me throw out a general request. Are there any viewers that wish to articulate a question at this point? Yes, we have a hand up by John Maishu, I think is the name. Go ahead, John. John? If you could turn your mic on and your camera on. Okay, all right, so let's see who else has their hand up. Okay.
Can you hear me talk?
Yes, now we can hear you, John. Thank you.
Okay, great. So my question has to do with this idea of being able to capture the value at a unit level, at a very sort of granular level in terms of what is the quality unit that's produced by the organization. So that could be an answered case, that could be a permit that's been approved at a regulatory type agency, that could be a return that's processed in the example that we were using of the IRS. But the idea is to make it into a granular level, not dissimilar than sort of what is the earned value analysis and how that functions, and also not dissimilar to what in the private sector we would determine would be the monetary value of a product that's produced. And then that productivity then is then measured before and then after, and also the quality measures before and after. And since we have disciplined ourselves to measure what a quality unit is, then the ROI is a lot more simple to calculate, even for managers who are in the field and don't necessarily have the benefit of a firm like REI. That's my question. What is the feasibility of that?
I'll take that for a moment, Mr. Monque. I think you're exactly right. And the important issue is that the reason people buy IT is not to have a nice computer in front of them. It is to achieve a mission purpose. And what that means is you have to be able to go and see, for example, if you're trying to process a benefit application, you need to be able to say, well, how many did we process? And did we do a good job? How many of them were brought back or had a problem? You're not going to be able to get the data from your IT data center in terms of it's not a fact about the IT, it's a fact about the mission activity. And so the kinds of performance measures you're looking for, you're exactly right. You need kind of a picture of what's the performance before, what's the performance after, or what is your projection of performance after. So essentially you can tell, how much do we think we can get in terms of improved performance, or how much did we get after the fact? And so what we find eventually is that the folks who are in the IT office don't necessarily have the right expertise to be able to kind of look at the program's performance and then to either estimate how much could it improve or how much did it improve. They must collaborate with the program. But in all senses, I think that makes a huge amount of sense, because we want the IT people to collaborate with the program people to help improve the program and to help achieve that mission performance, and as well to be able to do so in a way that's quantified. Because if you're eventually going to say, well, how do we value that improvement in performance if we need to, or just how much are we going to get, you have to have that collaboration.
There's a question in the chat directed at you, Jeff. There are some IT systems that have modernization development work embedded in their O&M, which seems to increase O&M costs. So when you look at a portfolio, it may show that an organization is not investing in modernization. Do you know how we can still measure ROI in that system, or suggestions to decouple?
So when you're making a change to a system, whether it be a small incremental change and kind of an enhancement, or even just, improving the operational efficiency. It's hard often to distinguish that cost from the cost of just kind of keeping the system up and running with its lights on. And so eventually the question comes, if you're really strongly interested in considering that as an investment, that becomes kind of an accounting question. I recommend that you think about using what's called technology business modernization. Basically what that is, at least in my mind, is kind of a set of topics for which you say, well, IT costs fall into this topic or this bucket, or what they call this tower. And so that you can then say, well, we've segregated out what are truly the kind of the keeping the lights on and the machines running costs from what are changing or improving the capabilities of the software costs. And again, it may be that you have an IT engineer who is doing a little bit of each. And if you really want them separate, you would have to say, well, how much of your time are you spending on one versus how much of your time are you spending on the other? So if, again, you're looking for a really rigorous kind of return on investment model with good cost allocation and accurate estimates of your costs, especially in the future, but also in the past, you need someone with some kinds of accounting and cost allocation expertise, and you need to have the records there that will allow you to say, we estimate that Sam, the system engineer, spent 20% of his time keeping the lights on and 80% of his time developing enhancements. Therefore, 80% of Sam's salary and fringe and benefits are the investment that we made in those improvements. Let's see whether or not that investment paid off with a return. And similarly, as Mr. Mike Q suggested, you do need to have kind of your performance measures identified, and then you need to try and gather information from both the before perspective and the after perspective to say, well, how much did the performance improve? And eventually you can say, is it worth it? Or you can take the step further and say, let's try and put a dollar tag on the amount of improved performance. In some cases it's possible, in some cases it's not. And even in the cases where it is possible, sometimes it's desirable, but sometimes it's not. There will be people who will take political action and say, hey, if you made that much improvement in investment with your IT, that much improvement in performance, maybe we should just cut your budget. So that's a risk. And clearly the IT managers and the financial managers to make the decision as to, is this the right time to put a dollar tag on that performance improvement or not? Will it place us at risk? Will it place the mission that we're trying to achieve at risk?
Okay, thank you. There are no questions in the queue remaining. There is a few minutes left in our time this morning. Does anyone, oh, wait a minute, I do see a hand up by Mr. Nakin. Is that correct pronunciation? Mr. Nakin, was that your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Harry. The question is for April. One thing she touched on was beautiful in a way on the tech industry. I come in from the tech side. Was that most of the projects, as they're looking at the agile, is also an understanding to assess the duplicacy and come up with that insight that projects are not duplicative, and that type of mindset is put in. But how do you counter any of the emerging tech where things are so uncertain at this time? Things are moving like AI, right? Pretty much everyone is pounding on it at this time. And there will be definitely fast fail kind of projects that would happen there. So how do you look at, or you're looking at, the projects which are going to make an impact in the near term, but there are certain things which are going to make an impact in the longer term, whether it is on the cost or it's on the improvement of the user experience, but there is a chance of failure on those projects. So is there an understanding that those type of things will be undertaken as you move along the agile methodology or modernization efforts along with the emerging tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, part of how we develop is using proof of concepts. To first, we need to identify what the business problem is, and then identify a technology that can help to solve that business problem. But between Agile and doing the proof of concepts, that allows us the opportunity to see if the technology does meet the business need. And then technologies can constantly evolving, right? So in GSA, we have a fast cloud services ecosystem, and it's designed so that as technology evolves, we can swap out certain components within the ecosystem so that we are constantly modernizing and keeping up with technology in our environment. And then that's available for all of our application developer teams to leverage. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. And other panelists too, like if anyone can, provide their perspective, that would be good too. I think this is the area where we see, at least from the outset, as we are coming in, contractors or companies looking at the solutions, that there are projects which are existing systems, and there is a very definitive clarity on, okay, this is the impact that a project or system is going to make. But when there are uncertainties and when things are to be innovative, that's the place we want to understand from the outside. Is that where we should be looking at, and government will be needing, some sort of support in that area?
The panelists want to comment on the area of the impact of AI? Well, I think, yes.
Yeah, I can I can chime in. I mean, there are a number of areas, AI being one of them, where you often don't know how well the systems are going to be performing, how to use these technologies, because when it comes to the government space, we have to be very mindful that when we use AI, that we are, we're not making decisions that may be biased. So how do you ensure that we use AI appropriately, make sure that privacy is top of mind and always considered, and bias is something that's taken care of. So these are things that need government to iterate on, and we definitely would partner with a number of our vendor partners to help us iterate on these problems. And these are the kind of problems where we don't go in and say, this is the return that we're expecting, but rather we go in and say that, okay, we're going to try a few things, and let's see if we can prove that we can, first of all, remove the risk of bias and that privacy is protected as two options. So yeah, there's a number of solution problems within the government space where, in some cases we know, okay, we want to reduce the call wait time, or we want to reduce the time it takes for somebody to figure out when they're going to get a refund, or things of that nature. But in other cases where we have new tech and we're trying to see how can the new technology be used within government agencies to both improve efficiency and deliver, solutions that make the life of our citizens easier. So there's definitely a level of experimentation and iteration involved there.
If I might, at the risk of hopefully of not offending Mr. Ruffall, make a suggestion. I think AI will have a lot of opportunity to create tremendous value for government. And I think right now, not everybody has in mind, they think, oh, ChatGPT, generative AI with kind of free-form text. But if you start to think about, again, the problems that government challenges government faces and how AI could apply that, I'll give you an example, which is with respect to having a person fill out their tax return in compliance. Some other countries use a model of the agency itself completes 90% of the return and lets the individual validate it. So the IRS has made a tremendous step forward with direct file. It could use AI to complete a substantial portion of that form, and again, let the person validate it. The model I think that kind of hints at is to say, we want to reduce customer burden. How can we use AI to help? We want to improve tax compliance. How can AI? We want to reduce IRS processing, labor, and effort. How can AI? And so thinking about it in terms of the problem and kind of what I would consider that's kind of an example of of AI being used for, in that case, kind of mass customization, giving a different customer experience to each customer and using AI to do that. That again could produce tremendous value by essentially saying, you know what, a bunch of things where either the taxpayer has been burdened or IRS employees' time has been required could be resolved by AI. Now, if you said to me, well, how much money will that save for the IRS? I don't know. That would take a lot of effort to kind of figure out. But I think, kind of we've hit the root of it, which is that's the reason we're kind of pursuing IT, because it will help us do our jobs better and help us reduce customer burden. And so the kind of the ability to then capture that, if someone says, well, I'm not sure we have enough money for that, that may be the point at which you get pushed to say, well, let me quantify it. Let me show you what kind of improvement this will really bring.
Great.
Absolutely right, Jeff. There are many opportunities within all of our agencies to use AI for burden reduction and efficiency in a number of ways.
Thank you. Well, I think this is a great note to end on. We are at time. Let me, on behalf of Howard University and REI Systems, let me thank our panelists for their time and their insightful comments, and thank our audience for attending and giving us some of their morning. Very gracious. I know I've been personally edified. I hope everybody has been as well. Jeff, if you have any closing comments?
No, I was just going to say, if you registered for this event, even if you weren't able to attend the whole thing, we'll be happy to share again the AI model slides with you. I think kind of having the concept in place, you would need to, of course, think about how it applies in your agency differently in different places. And we will look forward hopefully to seeing you again. We typically do these about once every 6 months or so in the spring and in the fall. So we'll look forward to seeing you kind of connect with maybe government IT challenge and some government experts who've helped address the challenge successfully to be able to share their expertise and their insight with you. But let me also thank each of our panelists. We really appreciate your time. And thank you for your contributions to the government community. Thank you for your service. And I hope, again, that we can draw closer connections between Howard University, the best HBCU in the country, and our government IT community. Thank you all.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.